What's going on, guys? It's Fantasy Stock Exchange here, bringing you the second episode of the Dynasty 101 series we're doing over here at the Fantasy Stock Exchange YouTube channel. And we got a little special guest on for today's episode where myself and Ron are going to be attacking the ways of having a successful startup when you start up your Dynasty draft. So, with that being said, Ron, how you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great. I appreciate being on the Fantasy Stock Exchange. It is always a pleasure to be on here. Ready to get into some, macro analysis today with you.
Amen, amen. And for those of you that didn't watch the initial episode, this is more so a macro market based type of series where we're going to be talking about the theories on surface level as opposed to the micro player X versus player Y, who you should draft, more so on a who's overvalued, who's undervalued type of level. But we're taking that to the startup. We're taking how to maneuver your startup board, how to start your startup, and how to overall create a draft that you're going to look back afterwards and be like, I fucking nailed this shit out of the park. But before we do that, as always, we're going to hit that damn intro. All right, so for today's video, we actually structured into certain segments that we look for when we're preparing for our startup drafts. And the first one, of course, preparing for your startup draft. What are your biggest tips for new startup players when they're going into their first startup?
For me, this is I almost when I wrote this down, I almost hate that I wrote it because it's so like cliche and it's almost like something you'd find on like just a very basic channel. But like I can't stress enough, go out there, at least skim over the bylaws of the draft. Don't be the guy like in the third round who's like, oh, kickers are rookie picks. There would never be a world where if I found out that there was rookie picks in the third round where I wouldn't like want to just throw the entire team away. And then like obviously like tight end premium or touchdowns 4 or 6. So I mean like that's very basic, but I think it goes a very long way, if that makes sense.
I fully agree. I mean, realistically, the aspect of tight end premium you mentioned up is perfect because you're talking about, let's just say, a full point tight end premium. Well, Kyle Pitts probably goes from a back end first round type of pick in a normal startup to if it's a full on 2x tight end premium. Like this guy's arguably a top 5 overall startup pick. That type of micro player value is ultimately affected by the macro scoring in your league because a guy like Kyle Pitts instantly becomes untouchable in that type of premium league versus, I mean, he's already untouchable in normal leagues, but he just goes even that step further. So I fully agree. Make sure you know your scoring, make sure you know your startup settings. And another thing that I kind of wanted to bring up is if you have a league where you get to pick your startup pick, let's just say there's like, a draft of order and you get to pick your startup pick, please know in advance whether it's a regular standard startup or if it's a third round reversal. And segueing into that, comparatively from your startup or your standard startup to your third round reversal, what are your favorite type of pick ranges in each of those drafts? Because there is a lot of different strategy that goes on with both of those.
I would say for third round reversal, because that kind of seems like the standard now, or for most like advanced leagues, it does get tough because there is no other like untouchable. Like if I'm the first spot in like a derby and I can pick wherever I want to go, in a third round reversal, it's tough to pass on like Mahomes and Allen because those guys are untouchable. But I have recently started to switch to wanting to go at that back half of the 12 or at the back half of the first round, like in that 12 spot, 11 spot, just because of the value you can get at the turn where you can kind of go, you can start those first 2 rounds with like in a tight end premium super flex, you can go Trey Lance, you can go Kyle Pitts, Deshaun Watson, and then come back around in that 301 and usually scoop like somebody that's falling. Like, I know you will love, like a CD Lamb. You could probably find like a Brees Hall at a 301. I've gone to McCaffrey at a 301 before. So that's a spot I like, but I will say non-tight end premium. I think the easy answer is definitely, that first overall, second overall as high as you can. Because if you can get that, premium quarterback and then come back around 24, 25 and just scoop up the value, you're going to be at a massive advantage.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. If you are picking, your stand up, 101, 212, 301 type of format, if you will, in terms of pick structuring, well, you want that 101, you want that 102, you want that Allen Mahomes because, quite frankly, they're immovable type of pieces. And realistically, if somebody's willing to move up, they are going to offer you basically their whole draft just to secure that pick, just for one of those 2 or 3 assets. If you want to even throw Herbert in there, those are like the untouchables post startup. And when you're talking about third round reversal, again, you mentioned back half. I feel like for me personally, that 9-10 type of area is typically the area I really like, because the way I look at it is you got your top 5 or 6 quarterbacks, your Watson, your Murray, your Lamar, and obviously the top 3. And then you still got, your Chase, your Jefferson, and your Taylor that are considered the untouchable flex pieces. So basically guaranteeing yourself a shot at getting one of those. And then, on the background, maybe a guy like Dak Prescott, Trey Lance falls to you. You're looking really, really good. Not to mention you combine that with that early third, and maybe Brees Hall 101 is sitting there for you. That's a phenomenal start, and one that I actually was able to capitalize on in our most recent startup.
Yeah, 100%. I was going to say, let's say you're not at like the first, I would say like at the first pick of a derby and, the back half is pretty much filled. I think that there's a case to be made to go up front. I think Bush kind of made a good point. I remember in the sleeper chat when we were doing our startup with a third round reversal, I think you probably want to go. I think that next sweet spot is probably like right around like 6, right? Where you can get that last quarterback from, Mahomes, Allen, Herbert, Lamar, Kyler Murray. And then you're still in that middle spot. So you're not getting too much of a disadvantage from the reversal, because you're still, at that point getting the same pick in the third round reversal by maybe give or take 1 or 2 picks.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. Like, as long as you can lock up one of those, stud quarterback top of the line assets, or, other, untouchables post draft like Chase, Jefferson, Taylor, I really, really like that. And in terms of resources that you'll use in preparing for what exactly the market value would be in your startup draft, how to know, what your type of, value points are, what are the main resources that you personally use?
I would say off the top, in terms of, trying to gauge just kind of where players are going to go, I prefer Keep Trade Cut, which is, it's just a crowdsourced ADP pretty much. And the way I do it, I like to kind of see pretty much like best player available. I'm kind of a sicko, so sometimes I will get like a spreadsheet set up of, the Keep Trade Cut guys and just kind of cross them off as you go. And then if you have your own rankings, you can just sort of cross-reference them at that point where, you see the highest tier up in terms of Keep Trade Cut, and then the highest tier up of, your rankings, and you can kind of cross-reference them and see, where the overlap is. That's usually kind of where the value pocket is in drafts.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that. Obviously, again, as you guys will know, as I'll plug into, we do have our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto available. But yeah, I mean, for me personally, if I'm in a startup, I'm going to be referencing that Keep Trade Cut to kind of know what type of value I can get away with comparatively from the market to my own rankings. And speaking of my own rankings, Dynasty Rankings Manifesto, where you can get myself and Corey's full Dynasty rankings. You're talking about bucketed rankings, full-on rankings, top 100s, rookie rankings, you absolutely name it. There is one of 2 ways you guys can currently get that. You can sign up on Patreon now, which obviously the link is all plugged in the description, and you get full access to our dynamic Dynasty Manifesto that we try to update every single month, along with a lot of other perks, a lot of packages that are currently available on our Patreon, talking about, Bush's player cards, other, databases available. Make sure you go check that out. And if you don't want to sign up on Patreon, there's actually another way that you can currently get it. You guys see that marker right in that top right corner of your screen, Underdog Fantasy. Appreciate our official affiliate, our official sponsor of the channel. If you guys sign up on Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE at checkout, it will provide you guys with access to our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto, our full rankings, along with a 100% matchback on first deposit up to $100. Having this plan set beforehand, having these rankings set beforehand is going to completely enhance your Dynasty experience and completely enhance your preparedness when entering into the startup. So had to shout out Underdog, had to shout out our rankings, but either way, we're now in the startup. We're on the clock. We're ready to make our pick. What are the first things you are considering when you are about to make your pick in your startup?
I think the biggest thing is I wrote this down. It's a little bit into the prep, but it's also into making your pick. But I think the biggest thing is to be flexible. I know a fantasy OG that me and Danny both respect greatly, Mike me up. He always quotes, Bruce Lee, stay water, be flexible. Don't go into a startup, thinking it has to be quarterback, running back, no matter what. I need to take, no matter what's going on at the 7th overall pick, I'm going to be taking Kyler Murray or, Kyle Pitts, whoever. I can't trust enough. Every draft is different. Just let the board fall to you, right? An example I had in a league with Danny where I trade up, I go grab Kyler Murray, I wait for my pick to come back, I grab Deshaun Watson. So at that point, those are the two quarterbacks I'm locked into. But then I see, Aaron Rodgers, he slips a little bit later on at the 6-12. And instead of, I could have passed on Aaron Rodgers at what I thought was a screaming value. But instead you can do, you can, at that point, I reached out to Danny, made a trade with him where I sent away Kyler, grabbed Justin Jefferson on the back half. But you can also just take Aaron Rodgers, and now you have three quarterbacks. You can trade one away later. Like you're not locked into these players for life. There's so much of, flexibility where you can just trade players away. You can acquire draft capital. There's a million ways to attack a startup. So I think the worst thing you can do is kind of lock yourself into a box when you go on, when you're on the clock.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because the next point on here was, would you consider filling your lineup or taking bus player available? And I fully agree with you. What people fail to realize sometimes is when they're in these decision points, when they're ready to make their pick, they look right at their team and they say, oh, I have two quarterbacks already. And, do I take, David Montgomery or do I take Aaron Rodgers? And then when you contextualize it and you realize like that quarterback post startup is going to be worth way more in your league market, guess what? Adjust yourself. You did a great example there. Aaron Rodgers fell to you. Guess what? I have Kyler Murray. I have another top quarterback. Let me try to figure out a way where I can take Aaron Rodgers and still be able to get that value, which obviously Justin Jefferson was a good, comparison from Kyler Murray to be able to still keep the value of your team. So yeah, I mean, I fully agree to you. Another thing I really wanted to ask is, when you were on the clock, are you valuing that instant production? Or are you evaluating that, long-term appreciating ability of the player? Because I got a firm answer here. And for me personally, it just depends on the league I'm in. If I know I'm in a sharp league, if I'm in, guys like Sanderson, guys like yourself, all those beauties that will basically not touch, instant producers for a long term, unless, of course, I'm fiddling with the no player strategy, I am in our current expert league.
I've seen it.
I'm more willing to take, instant producers and try to win in that type of stance. However, in more casual leagues, when, Dalvin Cook's going in the 4th round, Christian McCaffrey's still like a 1st round pick, like that type of league where these instant producers, these, 2021 top redraft type of players are flying off the board. Your Joe Mixons, your Nick Chubbs are flying off the board. At that point, guess what? Your best advantage is just taking, your Elijah Moore type of assets, your, CD Lambs, T. Higgins type of assets. Because if they're falling below some of these redraft style, Stephon Diggs type of players, like give me the value there at that point and just let me build that long-term type of dynasty, if you will.
Exactly. And I think it's good that you bring up that, like, I know you and Bush hate the aging running backs, and I hate the aging running backs too, but there's always a price where it makes sense. So what I'm about to say here in terms of instant production versus roster value, I don't fade all old players. Like the startup me and Danny just did, my team has DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, Christian McCaffrey on it. So I am all for getting, instant producers, but I think you have to do it kind of at cost. And I think overloading your team with instant production guys and then also like trading up for them and mortgaging your future is tough. You don't really want to build a team where you go in there and let's say you grab, like Cooper Kupp in the 2nd, you come back around, grab like a Stephon Diggs, and then, you load up on the Dalvin Cooks, Joe Mixons. You want to kind of, not that you need to be overly balanced, but I think that there is a little bit of a balance there where I think you don't want to be too top heavy in terms of instant production. And a really good chart that I saw, I'll send it to Danny later, but yeah, it's a chart from Adeko that I know Bean Counter has mentioned before, but only 31.91% of 1 seeds in the playoffs, like in a standard 6 playoff top 2 seeds getting buys, only 31.9% of the time is the 1 seed winning it all. Only 26.38% of 2 seeds. So even if you have like the most stacked roster ever, there's so much variance in the playoffs that, making your roster too top heavy and, going all in for the near term, it could really screw up your odds, for the next 5 years without it, without it even being a coin flip to win it all. It's not enough of a risk reward there.
Yeah. And again, that fits perfectly with kind of the theme, the kind of underlying story that we really try to teach when we're doing dynasty decisions, when we're doing other macro-based theory type of videos, is that a lot of people think, oh, my team is ready to compete now. I can mortgage, my 2023, 2024, 2025 first, if you will, because I want to, just make sure I win now. However, if you're going in a startup and you're getting a bunch of assets that can accumulate, appreciate in value, well, guess what? Once you're ready to compete, once you're, in 2023, 2024, let's just hypothetically, in casual leagues, you're getting Elijah Moore types, Devontae Smith types in your 6th, 7th round of your startups. Like, you're looking at a team by then where you have draft capital, you have long-term availability, and yet you still have that win now type of appeal of a roster. Only you have a lot more backup, a lot more, hedging in case anything were to happen from a downside risk standpoint. So in a lot of casual leagues, I still fully think that asset accumulation, value insulation, which if you guys don't know, we keep throwing around this term in the channel, value insulation. When we refer to value insulation, we're more so talking about the fact that how long can a player maintain or increase their value? So if you're comparing, for example, you're on the clock and you're eyeing, Justin Fields versus, let's just say, Joe Mixon, hypothetically. In a casual league, that may actually be a decision point because people might see, Joe Mixon was a top 5 running back last year. Justin Fields, barely started, and when he did, he didn't look good. However, you're comparing a 22-year-old quarterback with Konami code ability with an elite level ceiling versus, a running back that had his apex season at age 26 and has a lot of data supporting the fact that 1,500 plus touch running backs and 27-year-old plus running backs will fall off a cliff immediately. So while they may be comparative value at that exact point, we know projecting future-wise, Justin Fields has a much likelier path of increasing his value. Even if Joe Mixon ended up being the RB5 again this year, his value is most likely going down because people are going to see a 27-year-old running back with even more touches under his belt.
Exactly. And I think when we're talking about value insulation, I think Justin Fields is a really good example because when I was looking into value insulation, in terms of just trying to conceptualize it for this video, I think Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence are kind of the poster boys for it, right? They were both, I would say in most leagues, they were probably somewhere in the 2nd round of startups last year, maybe late 1st for Trevor Lawrence. They both sucked last year and they're still going at like round 2, 3 of startups. Like, these players that are insulated in terms of their value, they have resistance to, like the near-term variance and just bad performance. Like both of them, again, performed, probably in the bottom percentile of our expectations, and they're still top 12 dynasty quarterbacks, haven't really flinched much in terms of losing value.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. Again, like, has Trevor Lawrence gone down, from the maybe late 1st to mid 3rd in value in the year? Sure, but that was also after a historically bad rookie season. So if that is his downside risk where he depreciates, 15, 20 picks in value, at the end of the day, is that really a bad investment? Like, yeah, like you lost a little bit of value short term for sure, but if he has a great second year or even a pretty good second year, like, you're already getting the value back. So realistically, investing in these type of players that you think can, meet or exceed their potential this upcoming year, this upcoming next couple years, especially in the case of young, appreciating, rushing type of quarterbacks, like, all for it. Those type of investments are almost as gold as draft picks. And I mean, speaking of draft picks, when making your pick, we can kind of transition now into trading. When you are in a startup, are you more likely, obviously, again, pending your league market, are you more likely to be that guy that pushes your chips in and tries to win year one? Or are you that guy that's accumulating appreciating assets, accumulating all these picks?
I think it depends on, it kind of depends on the year, and it also kind of depends on what my like portfolio is. Once you have once you have more than like 5 teams, I did a lot of startups last year, and I would say pretty much all of them were productive struggles. So I wasn't really like competing in a ton of dynasty leagues. So I think it's important that like once of course this is like for beginners and advanced people and everything, but once you have more than like 3 leagues, you kind of want to try different things just to have, just so you're not building the same exact carbon copy of the same exact team. But I think this year there is a really unique, opportunity where these 2023 picks hold so much value that as much as they are gold, you can start to flip them and, get a lot of value. Like I think I flipped 123 first in a startup me and Danny did, and I got like I want to say like a 7th and 8th round startup pick. So I mean, both of those, for 23 first isn't bad at all. You can get even probably more juice than that from like a casual league, but I think this year it makes sense. Now I'm not saying that I'm going to, in every single startup look to trade up or trade down. Danny knows that I'll kind of move around the board just depending on what's going on. But it is, reading the room. I will say it's almost never a bad move to trade back. But I think that, the dynasty market is getting so sharp that not a lot of people are looking to trade back. Like if you go through the first round and somebody trades back, it's usually, kind of a surprise. Like by the time you get to like pick 12, that's kind of where, the trades start happening.
Well, yeah, and I mean, like that, again, that's more so in like your sharper leagues now. People are starting to become aware of these values. So some people are not willing to overpay to move up in a startup to go secure a top asset. Because I mean, a couple years ago, you're able to flip a first round startup pick into like a 3-5 and rookie first. Like simply put, nowadays that's almost impossible to recoup.
No shot.
However, again, in more casual leagues, if somebody sees a Lamar Jackson, a Kyler Murray, maybe a Joe Burrow type, which I mean, I'm sure at cost, me and yourself are kind of like, he's a little too expensive now, but I mean, that's obviously micro level. Let's talk about macro level. In more casual leagues, people might see that eye candy type of player and be willing to still overpay in a move up, because at the end of the day here, if people see something they want, that's that classic childhood instinct that they have, that if they see it, they want to have it, they got to have it. And sometimes they're willing to part with even more value than you would realistically expect for that asset. So again, I fully agree. Gauge your league market. See what your type of portfolio that you've already accumulated. See the type of dynamic that's kind of currently going on in that current league, and be able to capitalize on it. Like if nobody's willing to move up and you see, a tier breakout wide receiver, let's say hypothetically, you're nearing the end of that tier 2 and you're looking at, T. Higgins is still on the board at the end of like the 3rd round. Like you can make that move up from, an expected Devontae Smith, even Elijah Moore type, to go secure a T. Higgins because he would be a tier up, because everybody now in more sharp leagues are so focused on trade down, accumulate asset, that you can really take advantage of the market in more ways than one nowadays.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is definitely know your draft room, like you said, where if you are in a sharper draft room and no one wants to move, no one wants to move up, if it is kind of a, some mental gymnastics, because you don't want to be the fish in the room where you're the only one trading up, but there does become a point where there's value and you can kind of take advantage of that. And the one more thing I would add to trading up and trading back, I think one of the more important things is that if you trade up, it's fine to be aggressive, but I think it's a mistake to mortgage more than one class of picks. I think if you go like if you do your 2023 first, second, and third, 2024 first, second, and third, and you dip any farther past that, you're really setting yourself up to fail. And I will say, I had a league, I made that mistake last year. I've since replenished my draft capital. I think I traded like Justin Jefferson, Zach Wilson, and James Robinson for, I think, Deshaun Watson in like the 105 and 106. But I did have, in that league, I did hit on like Cooper Kupp late. I didn't end up winning the whole thing. But like it was a strong team. It just didn't make it all the way. And I kind of, in the offseason, you kind of set yourself up to then have to go into this kind of, not like a massive rebuild, but then you have to start really replenishing draft capital, or else you're up against the wall, where I had like, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins staring me down, and, Leonard Fournette staring me down, and not a single draft pick until 2025. So it gets really dicey at that point.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you guys watched the first episode of Dynasty 101, myself and Corey kind of went through our own trades in the offseason. And this was a team that I ended up trading basically away a lot of the older depreciating type of assets that I went into the startup last year trying to win now, right? I ended up finishing the regular season in first place, ended up having a couple injuries, lost in the semifinal. Start off the offseason, Tom Brady retires. He was my second, third quarterback. I also had Lamar Jackson. So at that point, I'm in a dilemma. This was a team that finished first, made the semifinal, but I ultimately ended up seeing, like, if Tom Brady's retired, realistically, even if I push more chips in the middle, like, how am I going to end up reclaiming that status as the top team? So I ended up making the executive decision, if you will, to start retooling. Obviously, of course, mid-retool, Brady ends up unretiring, but as a result, did not panic. As soon as Brady retired, flipped into a contender, flipped him in a package to a contender with Mike Evans and with another contending piece to end up getting like the 104, the 201, and Kadarius Toney. So those are the type of fluid moves that you have to be able to do. A lot of people, if something doesn't go their way, their first inclination, their first reaction is to just panic, say, oh, well, fuck, I committed to something. What am I going to do now? As Mike said, you got to stay fluid. You got to be able to, be water, as, great Bruce Lee that he's quoting from would say. So I mean, I fully agree with you there. I say that a lot. Comment down below the counter that I always say that. But either way, when you're talking about these trades, are you more likely, as we kind of alluded to try to trade up for that stud asset, or more so willing, if somebody's willing to make you a nice package, trade down from that asset?
I'll do both. It really just depends on where in the draft and like kind of what's on the board. There will be a certain spot where um just to touch on, having tiers and then as you go through the draft. So if I'm at like let's say I'm at the 401 and I have my 210 on the board and he's the only guy in that tier, you're gonna have to give me, you're gonna have to give me the Godfather offer for me to move off of that pick. You know what I mean? So it depends on what's on the board. It also depends on the position, because when it comes to trading up and trading back, I can almost always explain away, if you want to trade up into the first round and you give some, some heavy pieces away, you can almost always explain it away if it's an elite quarterback. If it's, if you're trading up and you're mortgaging some things you wouldn't like to mortgage, and it's to get, Justin Herbert or Kyler Murray or Lamar or even like Josh Allen, I think that's explainable. But I think it's a little bit dangerous to, if you want to move into like the mid second to go grab like a Cooper Kupp. I think that's a losing game, right? Where with quarterbacks, when we talk about value insulation, their shelf life is so long, and the top half of a startup is all quarterback. So you're giving yourself that upside, while also, long term their value is not set to go down by much.
Yeah, and I mean that's a perfect point. Obviously, again, this is not a micro video, but that's why a lot of more sharper leagues now, like we both love from a fantasy football point standpoint what Jonathan Taylor can provide us. However, if we're comparing, the shelf life of what 3, 4, maybe at max 5 elite years of Jonathan Taylor versus potentially 10 of a Justin Herbert, potentially 10 of a Patrick Mahomes, potentially 10 of a Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson type, it's really a no-brainer. And getting that elite asset out of position that should at least maintain their value, even if not, they get injured a year or whatever, they should at least still maintain their value, as opposed to if Jonathan Taylor goes out, knock on wood, ends up tearing his ACL in 2022 or 2023 hypothetically, that following year, I mean, we've kind of seen the snowball effects it's taken on elite assets like Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley, for example, guys that were picked in the top fours just in 2020, even last year at times, and are now worth like third for McCaffrey. Barkley sometimes makes it to like the fifth.
It gets ugly out there. And I will say, on the other side of things, you need, like, I'm trying to picture in my head, the kind of doomsday scenario that would need to happen for Patrick Mahomes to, fall out of the first round of a startup. Like
Impossible.
he would need to, like, I don't even know. It would have to be insane. Like he's so protected against the market that like they are like the true, along with rookie picks, but those young elite quarterbacks are, gold in Dynasty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and that's why we kind of talk about value insulation with certain positions, obviously with quarterback, wide receiver in general. There's a lot more fluid value insulation there because we expect their careers and expect their elite play to stay longer as opposed to the running back position. But you kind of touched upon it. I mean, draft picks are the most risk-free investment there can be, because guess what? If you don't have a player on your roster, there is no downside risk to that player getting hurt, having a bad year, getting older. Like draft picks are always going to keep appreciating, and they're for the most part in more casual leagues, the cheapest to attain in startups, which is why you'll hear, guys like myself and Corey, that when we're making our dynasty decisions, assessments, that's our main, fallback, because in a lot of casual leagues, people don't understand the value of liquidity, the value of asset management that draft picks really provide you from an insulation level.
I will also say, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Dynasty that I'll see on Twitter, that's like, I think I saw somebody say like they wouldn't take on like 12 firsts for like Jamar Chase. Like you're not gonna, if you, let's say you use 12 of those picks, like they're not all going to be studs. Maybe none of them will be Jamar Chase. Rookie picks are currency. They're not, you don't have to cash every one of those picks in. They're pretty easy to trade. As Danny said, they're liquid. You don't even be concerned with, oh, maybe I have too many rookie firsts at this point. I can't make all these picks. I don't need all these rookies. The more picks, the better. They're currency. You can trade them later. They are just like, they're simply just like tokens on your team that you can then, use to kind of move around your roster.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. And it's funny because everybody's going to say, give me Allen Robinson on the Rams versus the 2023 first, the classic Kyle Yates dunk. But I mean, it is true. A lot of misconception that we see on Twitter nowadays and even on some YouTube channels is, oh, why would I take this, unproven rookie in 2023 versus, a stud performer that can help me win and produce fantasy points now? But at the end of the day, if you're assigning a name already to that pick, you're already misunderstanding the value of that pick. The value of that pick, guess what? If it turns into, the 103, the 104, the 105 next year, yeah, you could take, a stud prospect, a Jahmyr Gibbs, a JSN, Keishon Boutte, a Jordan Addison type. Or guess what? Somebody who even values one of those players even more than you could flip into, two 2024 first or a 2024 and a 2025 first. There is just so much more potential, so much more fluidity that you can do with that type of asset versus, let's just say at that pick that you got that first, somebody took like an Amari Cooper or, a Chris Godwin even. At that point, like if you were to auction off Chris Godwin at that exact point versus the 2023 first, people are always going to be more intrigued about that potential as opposed to that known asset when they're on the clock anyway. So it's counterintuitive to begin with. Obviously, at the end of the day, we want point production when we're trying to contend. But when you're not trying to contend, we don't want to produce fantasy points. We want to try to keep improving that value of our own picks.
Exactly. You want to get the 101. Now, I'll also ask, I'm actually curious because I think everybody kind of does this differently, but like in terms of these startups are so I think the craziest part about startups is that you really can't get any practice in, right? Like, of course, on Underdog, if we want to get a practice for redraft, like nice little quick plug, you can just go on there. I got that red shield. I've done 1,000 of those drafts, but startups, like even if you do startup mock drafts, it's not the real thing because there's so much trading and every single startup is a different like ecosystem where people they value a 203 plus a 304. You ask one guy what that'll get you in one spot and you ask another guy, it'll be completely different scenarios. So I think everyone kind of has their own way of valuing startup picks. How do you approach when I slide in those DMs and you're trying to trade those startup picks, how do what kind of tools do you use in that spot?
Well, I mean, I'm contextualizing the market for the most part because I'm an experienced player. I can kind of already like theoretically like picture names to certain positions. Like for example, if I'm in a sharper startup, I know if I want a guy like Elijah Moore, he's not going to make it past the fourth round type of area. Versus if I was in a casual startup, maybe he's a sixth round pick. Understanding your league market, your dynamic, the way people kind of value certain archetypes of players is going to help you determine if that's a willing package that you're able to accept. For let's just say hypothetically, you're 306, somebody offers their 5 and 7 for. Like if you just think third round starter for fifth and seventh, like how I don't know if that's fair or not. We'll try to assign names. That third round starter pick, let's just say is T. Higgins. That 5 and 7, let's just say you're getting Devontae Smith and Rashad Bateman. Mm-hmm. That comes to your personal experience. What would you rather have? Would you rather have, the two young pieces or the one young piece that is heralded at a higher degree or higher value, if you will?
Yeah, exactly. And I will say, I'm a sicko and I shouldn't even really be, this is a nugget I shouldn't even be really giving away for free, but I sometimes, not every single time when a trade comes through, but I will go to Keep Trade Cut and they have the rankings, right? 1 through 24. So say I'm trading away the 101. I'll take whoever they have at first. I'll put in the trade calculator. And then whoever's at the 212 or like the 212 and the 301, I'll just take, their 24th player, their 25th player, plug it in and kind of just go from there and see kind of what Keep Trade Cut, like pretty much what you said, where you're assigning player names, but you go into Keep Trade Cut and you can kind of just visualize, kind of how the market would value those players. So I'll be honest, it's annoying to do. I don't do it for every single one, right? If you're in the 10th round and you got to go all the way to like 120 and, kind of mess around with it that way. But I think early on, it's a decent way, especially if you're more of a beginner, or even if you're only like, if you've done like 5 startup drafts, I wouldn't even say that that's enough to like it's so random across everything. It's really hard to get a baseline.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's why we talk about it from a macro setting. Because at the end of the day here, when you're in your micro specific draft, the market can be basically thrown out the window. You have to adapt to your league mates at that current point. Could I say, in my league that T. Higgins is worth, the 105 this year and a future first? Yeah, I could say that in my league, but maybe in another league, somebody's only willing to give, the 108 and 201, or another league, somebody's willing to give 3 1s. Like you can't really contextualize that so you understand the behavior and the tendencies of other people in your league and what your kind of leash or barrier. Obviously, again, you don't want to overpay or completely fleece someone, but kind of understanding those thresholds and understanding, the range of area that you're working between is going to help you long term with determining value in specific leagues.
Yeah, exactly. So on the micro, there's so much, there's so much variance that it's very tough to, apply one for one. So I will say, again, another nugget is I will do, what Danny said, where you can kind of visualize yourself. I have the keep trade cut method, but then you also can use, other trade calculators where I've used the Dynasty Dominator app before. I've used the Dynasty Trade Calculator before. Both of those aren't bad in terms of valuing startup picks, but I will say the Dynasty Dominator app, they value like the high end first, like 101 through 105 is almost untouchable for them. And Dynasty Trade Calculator, they just think that rookie picks are, me and Danny think that they're gold. They think that they think that they're like coal, the rookie pick. So if there's a rookie pick involved, don't use Dynasty Trade Calculator. But in terms of just like, like the 105 for, the 212 and the 307, and you have no idea what that means, it's not a bad resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, once you become a more familiar player and you understand the value of certain assets in certain areas of your draft, you're more likely to kind of just know that and adapt to it based off your own personal experience. So overall, aside from trading, let's get into the components of what you would consider as being a successful startup. So I'll let you take it away, and then I'll kind of add my own thoughts on here too.
Yeah, of course. So when I'm done, I would like the components of the team to be the way that I would like to build the team would be, to have my elite quarterbacks. I would like to have, I'm not trying to look at here's the thing. Sometimes, all startups are different. And sometimes, you're not, I think that the biggest, component of being happy with your startup draft is realizing that there's no startup where you look at your team and it'll be like absolutely perfect. Like there's still going to be, like we said, you're never stuck with these players for life. So there's going to be times where you kind of just have to be like, I don't like this player. Like Danny knows, everyone knows I hate running backs. I was in a startup with Danny where I took Nick Chubb, David Montgomery, and Leonard Fournette. I almost threw up, but I did it. And when there's value on the board, you take it. And then from there, you just, put a little note there. It's like, all right, if I'm going to be trading a player away, David Montgomery, Nick Chubb, those are the guys that are pretty much on the block for now. That you then figure that out later. I will say, like, just a little bit of a nugget in terms of micro. I have a guy, DJ Moore, who I know a lot of people in that league want. You're not going to get DJ Moore from me unless if you take David Montgomery or Nick Chubb. But I would say hopefully I have, like we said, if you're trading away picks, don't mortgage away like more than 1 year, right? I would like to have, either my 2024 or 2023 intact. Would like to have young elite quarterbacks to, stabilize production. And in an ideal world where, let's say it's not a team where I have David Montgomery, the other league I did with Danny, I have like McCaffrey, and then it's like Melvin Gordon, and it's just all of those, bench flyers like Melvin Gordon, like the JD McKissicks of the world, and just, stack that all on. But yeah, I would say hopefully all my value isn't in running back, and I have at least 1 year of picks.
I will say too, that's another point on understanding your league scoring and your league dynamic. Because that one is a best ball, we're more willing to not invest in those top end running backs because there's flashes in the pan. There's JD McKissic 10 reception games. There's Melvin Gordon 2 touchdown games. There's a lot more variance that can happen in a best ball format that you take a Melvin Gordon in the 15th round. Maybe he has 5 or 6 usable weeks for you where in a standard format type of league where you don't have to actually decide when those are going to come. So I fully agree on that specific aspect. You got your anchor, and then you just have a lot of upside, a lot of opportunity stored away later on your bench that you're getting a lot more value out of in round 15 Melvin Gordon versus say a round 6 Nick Chubb hypothetically.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. And it kind of coincides with what I deem a successful startup. There's 2 main things that I kind of look at on my perspective teams, and I'll look at and determine whether or not I actually like where I am. So for me, perfectly, clear and concise structure of my team in a clear plan with my roster. I don't want to just look at my team and see, oh, I have Elijah Moore, but then I also have, whatever old plotter running back, like let's say Nick Chubb or Ezekiel Elliott. Like I don't want to Josh. Like I don't want to have a bunch of upside but unproven players mixed with a lot of depreciating assets. I want to make sure that for the most part, if I am drafting a team, they're kind of coordinated together where when they hit their peak, that's my number one contending opportunity. So whether if that's a win now startup, I have more win now point producers year one versus if that's a productive struggle. I have, your Elijah Moores, your um, Antonio Gibsons, your Devontae Smiths, those younger assets that aren't at their peak yet, but should kind of align when they all hit their peak. Another way I look at it, point simply, if I'm in a productive struggle, I look at the value accumulated in my draft capital that I have, and potentially young, promising breakout potential players that you were able to sneak in later in your drafts. Let's just say hypothetically last year when Elijah Moore was a rookie and you did your startup, after the NFL draft, he was finding his way round 9, round 10, round 11. Like that is the type of archetype where if I'm in a productive struggle, I'm swinging for the fences on every single time. The Elijah Moores, the T. Higgins, guys like that are going at a certain area where you can reasonably expect them to appreciate in value, appreciate in startup, cost a year, 2 years from now.
Sky Moore.
That's a perfect one too. Yeah, we absolutely stand Sky Moore over here, and I'm sure you do as well. So, but yeah, either way, any closing thoughts you have here, or should we kind of wrap up this video?
We can wrap up. I will say, let me see if there's anything that, I missed. I will say on the front of value insulation, there's a really good thread that Jacob Sanderson put out. But the reason why, a little bit of a micro take, but the reason why I love Malik Willis is if he goes in the top 12 picks, he's insulated. He is going to be a Konami code QB. He's going to start for 2 years. And he's like, let's say he's a 3rd round startup pick this year. As of right now, he's like a 5th rounder. Yeah. We even saw Zach Wilson. He was a Jets quarterback. He sucked. He has maybe moved a round down in startup, ADP. Yeah. Malik Willis, if he's a 5th round startup pick, and he sucks in year 1, he'll give you, a couple of startable games, and his startup value will maybe move to, 6th, 7th round. And from there, you can decide, okay, he's not a good real life quarterback. We can move him away. But Jacob Sanderson had a really good thread where he pretty much, he looked at I want to say quarterbacks drafted since I want to say Andrew Luck. Any quarterback drafted in the top 15, 76% of them went on to start 3 or more years in the NFL. So you're getting, years of production from these guys, QB2, and then they're holding, value while they're starting because they're still young. And quarterbacks get a little bit of a longer leash instead of, like running backs and wide receivers where, they have one off year, you can kind of just chalk it up. Like Josh Allen and Sam Darnold were on similar trajectories through 2 years. So there's a lot of, variance. And Pat Mahomes didn't start until his 2nd year. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of leeway they give the quarterbacks.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'll talk about Malik Willis in a second because you just said something that just rang my ears, and I'm sure a lot of FSC listeners listening in know my thoughts on Malik Willis and maybe even share our thoughts on him. But just talk about Josh Allen, for example. He was not good in his first couple of years. Even in his 3rd year where he had that semi-productive, middle range quarterback type of year. Off of that year alone, this was a guy that even when it was a less sharp type of dynasty market in general, still find his way at the end of the 2nd round in startups. And now if he had that type of promise, that type of upside from his year 3 to his year 4, he may find his way in the end of the 1st, 2nd round. I mean, heck, we're looking at Trey Lance right now. Started 2 games this year, had a couple flashes, and now consensusly he's a top 15, 12 type of startup pick. It just kind of goes to show you that these Konami code archetypes, if they have flashes in the pan, if they have flashes of ceiling, and they have the attributed appropriate draft capital along with that, their insulation is through the roof. And I'm glad you mentioned that with Malik Willis. Malik Willis, it's simple to me. You got a guy with elite athleticism, you got a guy with elite arm, and you have projected high draft capital. Even if he is not a good real life quarterback, he could be, Jalen Hurts type of real life quarterback. He's still going to be Jalen Hurts next year with 1st round, maybe even top 10, top 5 type of draft capital. And Jalen Hurts is still an early 4th round pick in most leagues.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I mean, there's not much risk there of taking a guy like Malik Willis. I don't think he's, Trey Lance from a prospect standpoint. I think Trey Lance was a much more mechanically refined prospect. But in terms of ceiling, I mean, this is one of the only guys in the class, apart from maybe Breece Hall, that you can say, if everything hits, is going to be a top 10 startup pick next year.
And I will say, just to kind of close that out, there is a little bit of a misconception. We're talking about dynasty, and we're talking about real life quarterbacks. I think that I think it would be fair to say that he is a boom bust, low floor quarterback prospect in an NFL team's eyes, where, it could all fall apart. He could, not be the franchise quarterback, but in fantasy terms, he's going to be insulated to the point where even if he doesn't pan out, you will have, plenty of time to get out from under him without it, collapsing your team.
I mean, Jalen Hurts, prime example, kind of struggled as a passer, and he was quarterback 6 on points per game. Like, it just kind of goes to show you, I mean, hey, you have a problem with your scoring settings, go talk to your commissioner. But in 4-point passing touchdown leagues, if your guy isn't providing you value through the running game, you may as well just go take a shot at a similar valued guy with rushing expertise, rushing upside. So, I mean, Trey Lance is the prime example this year because he does have that Josh Allen type of, range of outcome where if he improves as a passer, if he improves in that situation with obviously with San Francisco, Kyle Shanahan, with his arm talent, with those weapons, with obviously the run game that he presents, like he's got top 5 startup pick in his range of outcomes, which is why you'll see a guy as quote unquote unproven as him work his way up startup boards because of that ceiling, because of that top percentile outcome.
Exactly.
But yeah, for sure. But either way, if you guys have stuck around for the last 45 minutes or so and you've enjoyed this episode of Dynasty 101, make sure you like down below, comment your favorite aspect of this video. And of course, you see Ron on Twitter, go give him a follow on Twitter. And I mean, I'll let you shout your YouTube as well, Ron.
Of course, I'm Ron Stewart. My YouTube channel's name is Ron Stewart. I do fantasy football on that channel. Sometimes I'll dabble elsewhere. Just did a mock draft on there. But the goal is to post daily videos for draft month. So check out the channel. Just subscribe. Check it out. I'm sure that you guys will like it. It's very, we cover the same topics on there that you cover here on the stock exchange. So that's all I'll really ask for is just go over there, check out the channel, subscribe. And if you like, you like what you see, feel free to comment, join the Discord, whatever.
Yeah, again, and as always, appreciate having you on, and we're definitely going to have you on again soon to talk some ball. But either way, peace out, y'all. Enjoy your day.